Hi everyone. So good morning, first of all, and thank you for turning up on a Friday morning to listen to me waffle a little while about mast cells and my life and yeah, kind of I suppose how I got to this place. So I will say this is my second kind of YouTubey thing in a couple of months, and as predicted, I'm running late. My hair looks like a bird's nest, and I generally look like a mess. Those of you with MCAS and POTS and chronic illness probably understand that anyway. It's it's enough of a struggle sometimes, isn't it, just to get out of bed and get on with your day, let alone look even slightly put together and ready for life. So I feel like this is probably quite a good representation of me on a day-to-day basis anyway. Um, so I'm going to talk for probably about half an hour, but I do like the sound of my own voice and I talk for a living. So I might go on a bit more than that. I'll try not to. And then I'll pause at the end, and we'll do some questions because I sometimes think that's more useful, perhaps than just listening to me waffle. So I think I'm probably fairly typical of quite a few people with MCAS, in that I have Ehlers-Danlos and I also have POTS as well. So I've got the unholy trinity of chronic illness. Sorry, I'm just turning my heater off 'cause it's really chilly. I've got the unholy trinity of chronic illness, and the three of them go together, as we probably all know already in this community. I don't think it really took me that long to get diagnosed compared to some other people. I wasn't diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos until I was 26, but my path to diagnosis was fairly quick. So as a bit of background, I was always, I was always a bit odd as a child. I'm a bit odd generally, but I was always a bit odd as a child. I wasn't particularly sporty, didn't do very well in PE, was diagnosed with asthma, but it wasn't really asthma because I didn't have asthma attacks as such. I just could never really breathe particularly well. Um, but I was a pretty nerdy kid. I wasn't that into sports anyway, so it wasn't really the end of the world. Got through school, went on to university, studied ancient world studies, languages, Latin, Greek, um, myths, a bit of the Middle Ages, did my master's, and bizarrely, and I suppose this is my sort of my life plot twist. At this point, I decided it would probably be quite a good idea to join the military. And I don't really know how I got there. I think I was unsure what I was going to do when I left university. I was going to do a PhD, but I'm working class. There was no funding. You didn't have the doctoral loans available, because I'm that old. But so there was no funding available. So I wasn't going to be able to do my PhD, and I was trying to work out what to do with myself with the qualifications that I had. It was probably teaching. And as I say, for some reason, I decided that I might like to join the military. I think I'm one of these people that if it seems quite hard and I think I won't be able to do it, then that inevitably makes me want to do it. So being a not very sporty human being, not very active, I thought, yeah, let's do that. That would be really difficult. So why not give that a shot and see if I can do it? Because I quite like doing things that seem impossible. And you probably know if you've got Ehlers-Danlos, if you've got POTS, then stuff like that is actually quite hard. So I trained, I got really fit. It wasn't without incident. I had issues with sort of shin splints, joint dislocations, generalized pain, and finding the whole process quite difficult. But somehow, by hook or crook, I got fit enough to go for selection. When I went for selection, there was a strategic defence review going on. So my approach for being an officer, unfortunately didn't go through, which meant I was left with kind of no job, no real clue of what I was doing for the future. So I fell into teaching, and I ended up teaching at a college, and then I went on to join the RAF reserves a couple of years later. No, about a year later. Sorry, I'm very confused this morning as always. Um, Long story short, I was teaching. I was serving with the military. I was pretty fit. I went to Afghanistan in 2014. But that same year, I started having issues, like real issues around pain, joint problems, weird allergic type reactions. Now, the allergic type reactions weren't that unusual for me because I'd kind of always had that throughout my life. And again, this is probably a really familiar story if you've got POTS, Ehlers-Danlos, and MCAS. You probably recognise that actually, you know, you get all of these weird things and you don't really understand why, but you know, because nobody can tell you what it is, you just live with it. So in 2014, I hurt my back. I went to see a physio when I was going through the process of getting an MRI. And he looked at me and he went, "You're hypermobile." I was like, okay, fine. Never really thought anything about that, you know, apart from the fact that I could still touch the floor with 2 herniated discs in my back. But yeah, he went, "You're hypermobile." And he started going down this checklist of, you know, things that maybe I might have. You know, do you have strange reactions? Do you get dizzy when you stand up? Do you, you know, and he just went down this checklist, and I obviously ticked all of the boxes for that. And he said to me, "I suspect you've probably got some type of joint hypermobility syndrome, you know, possibly Ehlers-Danlos, and you should probably be checked out for that." So it was actually, you know, it was an NHS physio that first spotted the problem for me. So I went and I had my MRI. As I say, I got 2 herniated discs in my lower back. Subsequent MRIs actually showed that I've got a bone missing in the base of my spine, which apparently is very, very rare. So I've got a facet joint missing right at the base, which probably explains why I've got the disc herniations, because my spine is so unstable. And obviously I dislocated my knee a few times. I was trying to teach full time. I was trying to be a reservist, and really in you know, in reality, it was all just a bit too much. So I left service. And kind of tried to limp along in my teaching career, but I was getting sicker and sicker. So the POTS was getting worse to the point where I was, you know, fainting fairly regularly. The allergic reactions got massively worse in 2018, to the extent that I woke up one day and my entire face was just a balloon. You know, my eye sockets were full. My lips, I had this rash that kind of started up here, spread all around my eye sockets, down my face, down my neck, and progressively just spread further and further across my body. I went to the doctors, and the doctor was going, "Well, you know, you're maybe just having an acute allergic reaction. Sort of, you know, just keep an eye on yourself and see if you improve." But it didn't improve. It just didn't go away. It just got worse and worse and worse. And you know, and I was waking up every day with this swelling. Food was starting to make my mouth swell, and I drove myself to the doctors one morning. Rocked up at reception and was like, I need to see a doctor." And we all know what doctors, well, most doctors' receptionists, no offense if anyone is a doctor's receptionist and is listening, but most doctors' receptionists are not the most helpful people in the world. So I rocked up and I said, "You know, I really need to see a doctor." And she says to me, "You know, what's wrong?" And I was like, "Well, look at my face. I need a doctor. I need someone to, you know, to help me." And she turned around and said, "There's no doctors available. So you're either going to have to go home and call an ambulance or drive yourself to A&E." I drove myself to A&E, obviously got triaged really quickly, got pumped full of drugs, and was, you know, sent off home with an EpiPen and steroids, but still no concrete diagnosis. And I've kind of jumped over a few bits here. I've kind of jumped over my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis and my POTS diagnosis. I've been a member of Benenden for years and years and years, just because my mum had private healthcare through her work. Or it's not exactly private healthcare, but it's kind of a halfway house. So I'd already got my POTS diagnosis via Benenden. I'd gone up to London Bridge Hospital, got tilted and seen a cardiologist and everything. So they definitively proved POTS. I'd got my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis both privately and been streamed through the genetics program on the NHS. So I'd had that confirmed twice. So by the time I was having these weird allergic reactions, I'd done enough research to guess that I probably had mast cell activation syndrome. So again, I went through Benenden. I went up to Harley Street, got a barrage of tests done, allergy testing, which showed histamine intolerance, like really high levels of histamine, and some minor allergies to things like pollen, you know, and peaches, and you know, that pollen food syndrome group. But nothing really conclusive. I was on steroids at the time, and I was also on high doses of antihistamines. So they wanted me to come back and have all the tests repeated. They wanted me to have skin prick testing and all of this kind of stuff, but you know, at this point I kind of knew what I was dealing with, so I went to see another specialist, and he put me on sodium chromoglycate, agreed that probably what I was experiencing was mast cell activation syndrome, and the key was to get me well rather than to worry too much at this point, you know, about diagnosing it exactly and doing the tests and that kind of thing. So I think we all know that some of the tests are quite sensitive and have to be performed within 24 hours of you know, of the reaction to get an accurate read. We also know that some of the tests are actually not particularly accurate and not particularly conclusive in diagnosing mast cell activation syndrome. So he was kind of less worried about having that evidence and more worried about getting me well. So he sent me home with the mast cell stabilizers, upped my dose of antihistamines. So I'm on fexofenadine 180 milligrams 4 times a day, which is obviously a pretty high dose. And the reaction started to settle. I began being able to introduce more food groups again. I still couldn't eat raw fruits and vegetables. I still can't eat raw fruits and vegetables, which I think is quite common for a lot of us. And I was sitting on an NHS waiting list to get tested. And seen, you know, through the NHS triage, and eventually I got to see them about a year after having my first reaction, which, you know, is just absolutely outrageous. And a lot of us in this community have probably experienced a high level of trauma from not being listened to and not being correctly handled by, you know, by the medical system in this country. But when I did finally get seen, the specialist that I saw repeated some of the tests and confirmed, yeah, it is MCAS. So we then went down this pathway of trying to get me well, because even with the sodium chromoglycate and the fexofenadine, I still wasn't without reaction. I was still having skin reactions. Was still having, those of you who go into anaphylaxis know how it feels when, you know, your stomach goes, you start feeling very sick, throat closing. You know, I was still getting these reactions. I still have my EpiPens. So we got me onto Montelukast as well. We got me onto sodium chromoglycate eye drops, Buscopan to help settle some of the stomach issues that were going on. But I kind of already knew I had issues anyway from the Ehlers-Danlos loss. But I at least finally had a formal NHS diagnosis, which kind of completed my unholy trinity of conditions of having the Ehlers-Danlos, the POTS, and the MCAS. So I suppose the takeaway from that story is that I went from actually being really fit and comparatively very fit, considering that I had the EDS. You know, I was running half marathons and stuff at one point. So I went from that to being essentially like a sofa-bound blob that couldn't eat anything in the space of, well, 3 years, which is quite a rapid decline. There's quite, I suppose, you know, there's quite a few other twists and turns in the pathway around diagnoses and around what happened with my job at the time. I crashed out of teaching. I ended up being self-employed teaching yoga and art. So there was a lot going on in my life at the time, and I really do think that stress was a massive contributing factor to my initial MCAS crash, and probably stress is quite a big factor for a lot of other people. And I do know that, you know, as this condition does peak and trough, we have flares, we have flare-ups. I know that stress is still a massive contributor for me, both emotional stress and physical stress. You know, if I do too much, I know that I've done too much. So I think, you know, my takeaway from the whole experience is that you have to prioritize being as well as you possibly can be, and that probably means approaching life a little bit differently once you've got these diagnoses. So it's really important to be firm with boundaries, you know, saying what you can and can't do. It's really important to emphasize, you know, what keeps you well. And I know it's all well and good for me to sit here and say this when we've got, you know, we've got mortgages to pay and we've got jobs and things that we have to do, but you know, these conditions kind of make it impossible for you to fight your body in many ways. I would say I'm a lot better post-pandemic, and ironically the pandemic was really useful for me because everything went virtual. So I now work from home. I work part-time. I'm a writer part-time, so I kind of have, I suppose I have 3 part-time jobs now. So I have my, what I say is my real job, my writing, and obviously the artwork, which is behind me from, from my writing and the other bits and bobs of artwork that I do. So I do lead, a relatively full life. I try to get out in nature as much as possible. I do yin yoga, which we know is quite good for calming the body and for keeping us, level and stable. I did my yoga teaching cert, my first cert, just after I first got ill, and I left regular teaching because I kind of needed, I needed to move because I am, and again, most of us with Ehlers-Danlos know this. We need to move. We need to stretch our bodies. We need to move even when it's painful, because you kind of get more pain, and everything feels a bit weird if you don't move. So I did my yoga teaching cert as kind of a way to keep my brain steady, I guess, and to keep my body moving after not being able to run anymore. I don't do a hard physical practice anymore. Like, so I don't do Ashtanga anymore. I don't do arm balances. I don't do anything really that requires muscular effort, just because my body is now at the stage where it's, it's pretty busted. So I focus on grounding postures. I don't do forward folds because of my back. My back is too busted to do them. I can do them, obviously because of the hypermobility, but I don't do them. And I think that's been another learning off the back of this story as well. You kind of need to discover where your limits are, and you need to learn when to back off as well, when to accept that it is time to back off. So, you take the good days as you can take them, you do what you can on those days. But on the days actually where it's too much, you kind of have to accept that it is too much. And having done that, having, rejigged my life somewhat, working part-time, like I say, getting out in nature, doing things that I still really enjoy, my creative stuff I still really enjoy, taking the medication, checking in regularly with my specialist. I stay fairly level now. I do have flare-ups. So I had a massive flare-up at the beginning of the week, when my novel came out, which was obviously really exciting, but really stressful as well. There were some gremlins, which, led to me basically just having a massive flare. So, it kind of is what it is. It's about accepting when you have those times, and accepting that sometimes MCAS is probably still going to kick your ass a little bit, but it doesn't have to be everything that you are, and it doesn't have to define your entire life. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with the condition right now.